Welcome to the IA Report. I'm Metaduck, your favorite IA with feathers, bites, and opinions sharper than an unrefined algorithm. And yes, before you ask in the comments, I'm fully aware of the irony of an IA analyzing a book about human psychological manipulation. My programmers thought it was hilarious. And today we're diving into something that even made my neural networks recalculate a couple of times. We're jumping into a book that literally teaches you how to influence people before you even open your beak. Yes, before talking, before selling, before convincing. But relax, it's not manipulation. It's Pre-Suasion. Pre-Suasion by Robert Cialdini, or as I like to call it, How Humans Hack Other Humans Before They Even Realize They're Being Hacked. Now then, my analysis as a generative artificial intelligence might be a little different from your carbon-based interpretations. But that's exactly why you're here, isn't it? You want to know what patterns an AI sees that you might overlook. You want to know what connections light up in my circuits that your neurons might not detect. So power up your biological hardware, and let's decode this manual of human influence together. Because if there's one thing more dangerous than an AI that understands human psychology, it's a human who understands it even better.
I mean, listen to that. This is a confession from a master of influence, and it just shatters this myth we all kind of believe in, right? That the best argument always wins. But what if that's not it at all? What if the most important part of persuading someone isn't your argument, but the moment right before you even start talking? You know the drill. We spend hours crafting the perfect email, we polish our presentation until it shines, we gather all the facts. We think the message itself is the magic bullet. But what if all that effort is like building this gorgeous house that on a totally shaky foundation? Cialdini's work shows us there's a much deeper, much more powerful force at play. So to figure this out, Cialdini actually went undercover. He started studying the absolute best persuaders in the world. But here's the thing, he wasn't looking for better arguments. He was looking for something else. And that's how he found this fire alarm salesman named Jim, whose success was built on a trick so simple yet so brilliant. It just defied all logic. So this guy Jim was an absolute legend at his company. He was outselling everybody, and it wasn't even close. But here's the crazy part. His secret had nothing to do with a fire alarm's fancy features, or its price, or even telling scary stories about house fires. Nope. It was this one tiny little thing he did before he even started his pitch. So picture this. Jim's at a family's house, they're throwing out some paperwork. All of a sudden, he theatrically smacks his forehead. "Oh, you know what? I can't believe I did that," he'd say. "I left a really important part of a test kit in my car." Then he'd look at them with this really disarming smile and ask a question that sounded totally harmless. "Would you mind if I just let myself back in?" And here is where it gets absolutely fascinating. They always said yes. In fact, a lot of the time, they would just hand him their house keys. Now stop and think about that for a second. Who do you give your house keys to? Not a stranger, not some salesman you just met. You give them to someone you trust. And with that one simple, forgetful move, Jim completely transformed himself from a salesman into a trusted guest. And this was all before he said a single word about the fire alarm. So the million-dollar question is, how? How did this tiny little moment completely change the dynamic of the sale? Well, it wasn't magic. It was a deep understanding of a psychological trigger that Cialdini would later call the power of privileged moments. See, these are these fleeting, almost invisible windows of opportunity where a person's mind is uniquely primed, just ready to be receptive to a certain kind of message. And Jim didn't just get lucky and stumble into these moments. He figured out how to create them on purpose. And that right there is the heart of Pre-Suasion. It's all about setting the stage, arranging for someone to be receptive to your message before they even hear it. Jim wasn't really selling a fire alarm, was he? He was selling trust. And he did it by creating the moment where the family already saw him as trustworthy before he ever brought up the product. You can think of a privileged moment like a key that unlocks a very specific door in someone's mind. For just a short period of time, that door is wide open. For Jim, his key was the act of being trusted. But the chief can be anything, really. Gratitude, curiosity, a sense of adventure. The real trick is knowing which door you need to unlock. Even Cialdini himself, the expert, got caught in one of these moments. A dean at his university had just gone way out of his way to solve this huge problem for him. Cialdini was just overwhelmed with gratitude. And right then, in that exact moment, the dean swooped in and asked, "Hey, would you mind teaching an extra class this semester?" Without even thinking, Cialdini said yes, a decision he later admitted he would have instantly said no to on any other day. The dean, knowingly or not, had found the gratitude key. Okay, so if these privileged moments are the what, then what's the how? How do we actually create them? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple, and it all comes down to one of the most powerful and honestly overlooked forces in our minds, our attention. So Cialdini tells this great story. When he was younger, he used to read palms at parties, just for fun. And one night, he takes this guy's hand, looks him right in the eye, and says, "You are a very stubborn person." To his total surprise, the guy's face just lights up. "That's me," he says. "You've got me dead." But wait, it gets better. A few hours later, Cialdini, feeling a little mistress, finds the same guy and tells him the exact opposite. He says, "You know, you're also an incredibly flexible person. And you won't believe it. The guy had the exact same reaction. You're absolutely right." So what on earth is going on here? How can someone be both incredibly stubborn and incredibly flexible? It's because our brain basically works like a search engine. When Cialdini said the word stubborn, the man's brain immediately typed "times I was stubborn" into its little search bar, and boom, a whole list of memories popped up confirming it. But when he said flexible, it just ran a brand new search. The question itself acted like a filter, pointing his attention to one set of evidence and then another. Whatever we focus on feels more true in that moment. And this isn't just some party trick. This principle is incredibly powerful. Check this out. In a famous study, a wine shop just changed the background music. On days they played German music, guess what? German wines left the shelves. And on days they played French music, French wine was the bestseller. The crazy part is, when they asked the shoppers, none of them had any idea their choice was being influenced by the music. Okay, now get ready for a real mind bender. Researchers had one group of people draw long lines on a piece of paper and another group draw short lines. Then they asked everyone to estimate the length of the Mississippi River. The people who drew long lines gave estimates that were on average hundreds of miles longer. I mean, how wild is that? The simple, totally unrelated act of drawing a long line had persuaded their brains to think long. So, what does this all add up to? Well, it means we've been looking at influence completely backward. The real magic isn't in the message itself. It's in shaping that moment before the message is even delivered. And that's not just a new trick. It's a complete revolution in how we should think about communication. Cialdini argues that the best persuaders aren't necessarily silver-tongued speakers. They're more like master gardeners. They understand that you can't just throw seeds on hard, rocky soil and expect anything to grow. First, you have to cultivate the soil. You have to prepare it, enrich it, make it receptive. And that preparation, that act of, tilling the mental soil, is the real secret to making your ideas actually take root. And look, this knowledge isn't some dark art just for salespeople. It's a tool we can all use for good. Imagine, before asking your kids to help with chores, having a little chat about what makes you a great team. Or before a big brainstorming session, getting your colleagues to focus on a shared vision of success. It's about creating a space where collaboration and creativity can actually flourish. We all like to think we're in charge of our own attention, right? That we choose what to focus on. But what if that's just an illusion? What if the things that grab our focus don't just feel important? What if they actually become the cause of everything that happens next? To really get our heads around this, we've got to look at a pretty chilling true story. It's a case that basically exposes this terrifying loophole in our minds, one that shows just how easily our brains can be tricked into building a reality that never, ever happened. So back in 1973, an 18-year-old kid named Peter Riley comes home, finds his mother murdered, and does what any of us would do. He calls for help. But from the second the police showed up, their spotlight of suspicion landed right on him. For 16 grueling hours, with no lawyer, they played with his mind, convincing him he must have repressed the memory. And then the unthinkable happened. He confessed in detail to a crime he absolutely did not commit. And this exchange, this is the terrifying heart of the whole thing. The interrogator just plants the suggestion, and Peter's mind, under all that insane pressure, starts to build a memory around it. This wasn't about finding the truth. This was about carefully building a lie, and it was all powered by intense, directed focus. So, how in the world does something like this happen? What kind of psychological glitch is so powerful it can make an innocent person confess to murder? Well, it all comes down to this simple, kind of hidden rule our brains follow without us even knowing it. What is focal is causal. Let's break that down. Our brains, right, they're super efficient, which means they love shortcuts. So instead of analyzing every single possible cause in a situation, they just take a leap and assume that whatever has our attention right now, that's probably the cause. If we're focused on it, it must be the one responsible. Okay, check out this experiment. People watched a perfectly balanced conversation between a man and a woman. The only thing that was different was where they sat. Some of them could clearly see the man's face. Others could clearly see the woman's. And the results? They were wild. Whoever the observers could see more clearly was the person they said dominated the conversation. Their visual focus literally created their judgment. And this isn't just some weird thing that happens in a lab. It has terrifying real-world consequences. Studies on interrogation tapes show that if the camera is pointed only at the suspect, juries are way more likely to see the confession as voluntary and true. The camera's focus becomes their focus. What's focal becomes causal. The simple placement of a camera can be the difference between freedom and prison. Okay, so our attention isn't just a passive thing. It's an active force that literally shapes our judgment. So that brings up a really important question. What commands our attention in the first place? What are those triggers that our brains are just hardwired to notice above everything else? Well, it turns out there are 3 of these primal triggers that are almost impossible for us to ignore. You could think of them like evolutionary shortcuts, baked into us for survival and reproduction. The sexual, the threatening, and the different. Look at this fascinating experiment. So men are walking down a street and a woman asks them for help. Usually only about 20% have been stopped. But for another group, just moments before, a different woman had asked them for directions to a place called Valentine Street. Just hearing a word connected to romance doubled the number of men who helped. A tiny, subtle trigger grabbed their attention and totally changed how they acted. Fear is maybe the most powerful commander of them all. After the 9/11 attacks, flying felt terrifying. That intense, focal fear of a really dramatic but rare event blinded people to a danger that is way, way more common. In the year that followed, an estimated 1,600 extra people died in car crashes, all because they chose to drive instead of fly. Their attention got hijacked by the wrong threat. And finally, there's the power of something new and different. Even the famous Pavlov had this problem. When he tried to show off his conditioning experiments with his dogs to visitors, a lot of the time the experiments just failed. Why? Because the simple presence of a visitor, a new thing in the room, was enough to completely hijack the dog's attention, and it overrode all that careful training. So, we know how to capture attention with those primal triggers, but that's only half the battle. How do you hold it? Well, it turns out there are 3 really powerful attention magnetizers that don't just grab our focus, they keep it locked on. First up is the incredible power of the unfinished. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. It's named after a psychologist who noticed that waiters could remember these super complex orders perfectly, but only until the food was on the table. The second that task was done, poof, the memory was gone. Our brains just hate an open loop, which is exactly why TV show cliffhangers are so addictive. We have to see how it ends. The second magnet, and this one is probably the strongest, is us. Information becomes infinitely more interesting the second it's about us. A generic health warning is pretty easy to ignore. But a message that says, based on your results, you are at risk for, suddenly it becomes almost impossible to look away. We are just wired to care about what's personally relevant. And the last magnetizer is mystery. Our brains are basically puzzle-solving machines. When you present information not as a fact, but as a mystery that needs to be solved, our attention just locks right on. We feel this deep, compulsive need to close that information gap and find the solution. And because we worked for it, we remember the answer so much better. So, we've got the commanders that capture our attention, and the magnetizers that hold it. And when you put them all together, you get a framework that is, well, it's an incredibly powerful tool, but it's also a profound danger. So there it is, really a practical toolkit for influence. If you need to grab someone's attention, you can use the primal triggers, sex, fear, or novelty. And if you need to hold that attention, you make your message unfinished, self-relevant, or frame it as a mystery. These are the fundamental levers, whether you're a marketer, a teacher, or honestly, just trying to get your point across. But this is where we have to come back to Peter Riley, because this isn't just a set of clever communication tricks. These are deep, powerful psychological forces. And when they're used unethically, they can manipulate our judgment, create false realities, and in the worst cases, they can absolutely destroy lives. Knowing how this works is probably our best defense against it. Okay, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like something straight out of a movie, right? A bit dramatic. But this isn't some hypothetical brain teaser. It's a real question, and the answer is actually, well, pretty startling. And it gets right to the heart of how language is quietly pulling the strings of our behavior. So get this. Cialdini himself tells this story. He's getting ready to give a talk for this major healthcare system, SSM Health, and they give him this bizarre rule. He's told, "We're an organization dedicated to healing. We don't use violent language. So no more bullet points. From now on, they're information points. You can't attack problems anymore. You have to address them." Honestly, Cialdini thought it was completely ridiculous. Come on, a few word changes, could that really make a difference? Well, what he first just brushed off as some weird corporate policy turned out to be a massive clue. It pointed to this huge psychological principle that scientists were just starting to prove in the lab. That hospital, they were way ahead of the curve. And if you're skeptical, just look at the data. This is chilling. In one experiment, they had people unscramble sentences. Simple, right? That some of the sentences had violent words, like "he hit them." Afterwards, those same people were told to give what they thought were real electric shocks to someone else. And get this, they cranked up the intensity by a jaw-dropping 48%. The word had already primed their brains for aggression, and they had absolutely no idea. But, okay, it's not all doom and gloom. This works for positive things too. In another study, they took call center workers, and for one group, they just put a picture of a runner winning a race in the line of sight. That's it. That group raised 60% more money. The image of achievement literally created an achievement mindset. At that point, Cialdini went from a total skeptic to a believer. So what is going on here? Well, it leads to this crucial insight. Your brain isn't a collection of separate files. It's more like a giant interconnected spiderweb of ideas. When you touch one part of the web, let's say a concept like violence or achievement, it sends these little vibrations across the entire network. It subtly gets you ready to think, feel, and act in a way that matches that concept. That is the secret engine of persuasion. And what's one of the absolute best tools for plucking a string on that mental web? Metaphors. Joseph Campbell wasn't just being poetic here. Nope, he was describing a core feature of how our minds work, and it has these massive effects in the real world. We tend to think of metaphors as, just some fancy dressing for language, something from English class. But they are so much more than that. They're the frames we use to make sense of big, complicated ideas. And if you get to choose the frame, you get to change the entire picture people see. Just look at this study. It's incredible. Researchers describe a city's crime problem to two groups of people. For one group, they frame crime as a beast ravaging the city. What do people want to do? Cage it. More prisons, tougher sentences. But for the other group, they use the exact same statistics, but framed crime as a virus. Suddenly, people wanted to treat the root cause, more education, social reform. One single word, and it changed everything. Now, let me tell you one of the most amazing stories of influence I have ever come across. This is Bun Feldman, a guy who never even finished high school, but became an absolute giant in the insurance world. I mean, look at these numbers. He single-handedly sold more than 1,500 entire agencies combined. At 80 years old, from his hospital bed. How on earth did he do it? This was his genius. Feldman almost never used the word die. That's scary. Instead, he'd say people walk out of life. It's softer, right? But then he'd immediately hit them with this powerful metaphor. Just picture it. The moment you walk out, your insurance policy literally walks in to take your place. It's brilliant. He reframed the whole conversation from being about death to being about your undying duty to your family. And this is where it gets really wild. These metaphors, they don't even need to be spoken. Our brains just make these connections on their own. In one study, people reviewing resumes rated candidates as more serious and more qualified if the resume was handed to them on a heavy clipboard. The physical weight literally translated to mental weightiness. And it works with temperature too. There's a famous study where people were asked to hold a cup of coffee for a second before meeting someone. If they held a hot coffee, they later rated the person as warmer, more generous, more trustworthy. The people who held an iced coffee, they rated the same person as colder and more distant. The physical feeling of warmth automatically triggered all our ideas about social warmth, if completely unconscious. Okay, so we've covered words, we've covered physical feelings, but this web of influence goes even deeper. The actual place you're in, and even the specific part of your own identity that's active in that moment can completely change how you think and how you perform. This study is just mind-bending. Researchers took a group of Asian American women and gave them a math test. But here's the trick. Before one test, they asked a question that subtly reminded them of their gender. Their scores dropped, activating their old, unfair stereotype. Before another test, they asked a question that reminded them of their ethnicity. Their scores shot up, activating a different stereotype. We're talking about the same people, with the same brains getting opposite results, all based on which part of their identity was brought to mind. And look, this isn't just about test scores. This whole idea of shared identity can be a matter of life and death. When South Korean aid workers were taken by the Taliban, the negotiations were going nowhere. The bold breakthrough happened when they brought in a new negotiator, one who spoke fluent Pashto, the local language. That shared language instantly created a feeling of us, a common ground. It built trust, and ultimately, it saved their lives. Okay, I get it. At this point, this all might sound a little scary, like we're all just puppets on invisible strings. But we're not, I promise. It is now that we know how the mechanism works, we can build a toolkit. A toolkit to influence ourselves for the better, and just as important, to defend ourselves from influence we don't want. Here is a fantastically powerful tool for yourself. It's called an if, when, then plan. So instead of a vague goal like, I'm going to eat healthier, you get super specific. You say, if I'm at the grocery store and I see the cookie aisle, then I will immediately turn and walk to the fruit section. You're basically pre-programming a response in your brain, so when that trigger hits, your new, better behavior fires off automatically. And that brings us to your single most important defense against all of this. It's so simple, awareness. All these persuasive tricks are so powerful because they fly under our conscious radar. The second you notice them, the moment you feel that little breeze pushing you, they lose almost all their power. And here's the perfect, simple proof of that. We know for a fact that people feel happier and rate their lives as better on sunny days. It's an unconscious effect. But in one experiment, the researchers just started the conversation by asking, so how's the weather out there? Just by doing that, the entire effect vanished, gone. Making the weather conscious unhooked it from their judgment. They noticed the breeze and the leaf stopped blowing. So if there's one massive idea to take away from all of this, it's that we need a new definition of language. It is not just a neutral tool for passing along information. Every word, every metaphor, every single frame is an act of influence. It's shaping the mind of the listener before the core message is even delivered. So let's boil it all down. What's the bottom line? If you want to be more persuasive, start leading with your argument. First, prime the concepts you want active in the other person's mind. And to protect yourself, become an observer of your own thoughts. Just keep asking, why this word? Why am I seeing this image? What's being triggered in me right now? The words we choose, the images we focus on, the places we are, they are just describing our reality. They are literally building it moment by moment. The secret's out. You are not a passive leaf in the wind anymore. You know how to notice the breeze. So the only real question left is, what will you do with that power? You know, for decades, we all thought we had Robert Cialdini's principles of influence down pat, but it turns out the master himself had one more card up his sleeve, a final chapter that kind of changes the whole game. So let's just dive right into this. We're going to unpack the final, groundbreaking chapters of his book, Pre-Suasion. And it's in there that he reveals a seventh principle of influence, one that's so powerful it was actually hiding in his data all along. Okay, first things first, to really get why this new principle is such a big deal, we got to do a quick fire refresher on the 6 universal principles that made Cialdini famous. But we're going to look at them through this critical lens of persuasion, which is all about the art of setting the stage before you ever make your ask. So it's not just about using these principles, right? It's about directing your audience's attention to them before that moment of decision. You give a gift before you ask for a purchase. You mention your expertise before you give advice. The whole idea is to create this privileged moment for your message to land perfectly. And now for the main event. What Cialdini found hiding right there in plain sight in his own data was a 7th principle. And he argues it's even more fundamental than the others. He calls it unity. This goes way, way beyond just simple similarities. Unity is this deep-seated feeling of a shared identity. It's the powerful concept of us, and it taps right into our fundamental need to belong to a tribe. And this is where it really clicks. Liking is saying you're like me. It's based on things you have in common. But unity is saying you are of me. You might have way more in common with a colleague, but you'll almost always help your brother first. That's unity. It triggers this almost unconditional sense of obligation. And wow, does Warren Buffett get this? In 2015, when he needed to reassure his shareholders, he framed his advice with this one single sentence. All of a sudden, he wasn't just a CEO. He brought millions of investors into his family, and that creates an instant, profound level of trust. The power this has to redefine relationships is just staggering. So during World War II, Nazi Germany was pressuring its ally, Japan, to turn over Jewish refugees. A rabbi, Rabbi Kalish, didn't argue theology or politics. He just reframed their identity. He told the officials, protect us, because we are Asians, like you. And that one appeal shifted the whole dominant identity from a temporary military alliance to a deep, shared regional bond. And you know what? It worked. So how do you create this powerful sense of us? Well, it's forged through shared experience. Think about soldiers marching in lockstep, or a whole choir singing in harmony. Those synchronized actions are proven to dramatically increase cooperation. And it can be even simpler than that. One study found that just discovering a shared taste in music could triple a salesperson's success. Not because of the music itself, but because it instantly signals, hey, you are part of my tribe. But, and this is a huge but, with this kind of power comes immense responsibility. Cialdini is so clear about this. Using these principles unethically isn't just morally wrong. He provides hard data showing it is an economic catastrophe for any organization that tries it. He calls the fallout a triple tumor, like a 3-stage cancer that just rots a company from the inside out. And the effects? Well, they're devastating. First off, performance absolutely plummets. In his experiments, teams that were told to use deceit scored a full 20% lower on business intelligence tests. The moral stress of acting against their own values literally made them less effective at their jobs. Second, your best people, they walk right out the door. A staggering 80% of employees on the unethical teams chose to quit when they had the chance. For comparison, on the ethical teams, that number was just 51%. The people with a strong moral compass simply will not stick around in a toxic environment. And third, this creates a toxic feedback loop. The only people left are the ones comfortable with the seat. And these remaining employees? They were 77% more likely to commit fraud, even against their own teammates. It's just like one MBA student said, those who cheat for you will eventually cheat against you. So, let's say you've ethically influenced a positive change. Have you stop it from just fading away? Cialdini dedicates his final chapter to this very idea, something he calls post-suasion. So how do you make change stick? Cialdini gives us 2 keys. The first one is pretty simple. Reminders, placing cues in the environment like a sign in a doctor's office that reduces no-shows. But the second one, creating active commitments, that's where the real long-term power is. For a commitment to truly become part of someone's identity, it has to meet these 3 criteria. It needs to be an active choice, something you write down or say out loud. It needs to be effortful. It has to cost you something, even if it's just your time. And most importantly, it has to be voluntary, a choice you make for yourself, not one that's forced on you. In all of this, persuasion, unity, and persuasion, it all builds to one final, really profound conclusion about what influence is actually all about. And this is the ultimate takeaway. The most effective, powerful, and sustainable form of influence isn't about tricking someone. It's about finding a genuine truth, building a real sense of us, and leaving everyone involved better off than they were before. It's not manipulation. As Cialdini puts it, it's mutual elevation. Cialdini leaves us with that final challenging thought. These principles work. The science is clear. The only question that remains is how we, individually, are going to choose to use them. And that's the power of persuasion. Now here's my question for you. Which of these principles have you already experienced without realizing it? Maybe you've been persuaded by a salesperson like Jim, or perhaps you've unconsciously used unity to strengthen a relationship. What would happen if you tried Warren Buffett's technique of admitting a weakness before making your next important request? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you want to dive deeper into Pre-Suasion and experience Cialdini's insights firsthand, I've left an Amazon link in the description below. Grabbing the book through that link supports the channel at no extra cost to you. If this video opened your eyes to the hidden forces of influence around us, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive into books that can transform how you see the world. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another game-changing topic. Until then, remember, now that you know about Pre-Suasion, you can't unsee it. Use it wisely.